The purpose of this video is to review my model for civil discourse. This will be a model that I will use throughout the posting of any and all issues on this particular site. So the model I use is what I call the 4 pillars of civil discourse. Each one of these pillars, of course, is important, but only by employing all 4 of them can we think about having a discussion that stays focused and moves forward with perhaps resolution. So let's go over these 4 pillars. The first pillar, no judgment. There will be no name calling, no personal attacks, no triggers, no dog whistles or coded language. All of those things before any discussion is begun should be talked about. We're not going to read anything into what someone says. We are going to establish a process for getting clarification. So if you hear something that concerns you, ask for clarification. Don't assume what the person means, don't infer some kind of meaning, and don't add your own meaning to the other person's words. Take the words at their value rather than try to give them your own meaning. This is the second pillar, agree on terms. And again, this is one you want to talk about before actually having a discussion. You need to be specific. You need to clarify. And you need to have a consensus with those who are participating in the discussion on these meanings. So for instance, immigration is an issue I'm going to raise later on. But let's talk about an immigrant. What do we mean? I hear the term illegal immigrant and I hear the term immigrant. If we're going to have a discussion on immigration, we need to say, well, here's what an immigrant means. An immigrant is someone who goes through our legal process, comes to our country legally and lawfully. An illegal immigrant is someone who goes through our system and enters the country through that system but has lied on their paperwork. And then we have border violators. And these are people who cross our border trying to come into our country and gain not citizenship but residency. Now, we may not agree on those terms before the discussion, and we may come up with some other terms. The important thing is we talk about it before we have the discussion. And it may be that these meanings only apply during the discussion. That's fine. It's just when they are used in the discussion, everyone in that discussion needs to understand what those words mean. We will not confuse or conflate any meanings. So, agree on the terms. Let's go to the third pillar, perspective. All perspectives are valid. Disagreement doesn't mean someone is wrong. Imagine you're looking at a dollar. Imagine there's 2 people looking at a dollar for the very first time. Someone sees the top picture and the other person sees the bottom picture. And then someone asks, so what's on a dollar bill? And the person looking at the top picture says, well, there's a picture of some man on the dollar bill. Well, the person looking at the bottom picture is going to say, no, that's wrong. That's perspective. We need to understand that and recognize that perspective is valid from all people. One of the beautiful things about civil discourse is hearing other people's perspective. Hearing other people's perspective broadens our own. A good discussion isn't about changing a mind, it's about opening a mind. It can be a learning experience. It is the essence of why free speech is so important. We just need to recognize before we have the discussion that perspectives are valid. And differing perspectives doesn't necessarily mean someone is wrong. Okay, the fourth pillar and the last pillar is context. I'm sure you recognize the notion of snapshot versus a movie. Let's take a look at how that might look. If someone asked me, for instance, so what do you think? Is Drew Brees a good quarterback? Well, let's take a look.
Top of the screen, it's 2nd and 10. Brees looking, end zone shot is intercepted by Deion Jones. Incredible.
Now, as you can see, Drew Brees must be a horrible quarterback. He threw an interception. If that's the only play we look at, if we remove Drew Brees from the context of the whole season, we can say a very different thing. In reality, last season, Drew Brees had the highest ranking as a quarterback in all of the NFL. And yet, if we look at just this one video clip, we see the interception. Someone can just stand up and say, he's a bad quarterback. Look at that interception. Context is important. Now, this is perhaps the biggest danger in civil discourse because it is so easy to remove context. We focus on one event, a speech, a text, a tweet, whatever. And we proceed as if that single input is representative of a whole. So again, before we go into the discussion, we need to talk about full context needs to be included before the discussion can take place. Okay, those are the 4 pillars. No judgment, defined terms, perspective, and full context. Now I've added something in here, that cute little statue, filters. Filters are similar to perspective. However, whereas each of us may have a unique perspective, we can all use the same filters sometimes. Some examples of filters: an emotional filter, an intellectual filter, a color filter, a gender filter, personal experience. There are many filters. Generally speaking, to the extent an issue touches us personally, the filters we use have more influence. For instance, the horrible tragedy in El Paso. Let's go back 2 weeks, and I'm wondering if we had a discussion with any of the relatives of any of those folks that were horribly murdered and talked about, for instance, gun control, what that discussion might look like. And would it be different than if we were to have that discussion right now, right after the event, with those same people? They are connected very strongly, emotionally and personally to the event, and that filter, or those filters, is how they may see the issue. And that's how they may add input to the discussion. So we need to be careful about filters. We all have filters. We need to recognize that sometimes, without even knowing it, we're looking at an issue and we're looking through at least one of those filters. And we need to be open and honest enough in a discussion to talk to each other about those filters and suggest that we maybe take those filters down. Okay, so that's the 4 filters. That's the model, I should say. This is the model I will use as I start bringing issues up in this particular site. I encourage and invite anyone and everyone to participate in the discussion. Please remember, we're going to use this model of civil discourse. Now there's a second part I'll have in a different video, and that is if we want to look at a discussion with an aim of finding a solution, there's one more piece, or actually a couple more pieces we need to add so that we can have a civil discourse that's aimed towards solutions. Thanks.